Has a Bible verse been thrown at you suggesting you're doing wrong by seeking a sign, that you're part of a wicked and adulterous generation? I know I've heard that verse used to condemn those who believe in miracles and the prophetic, but what if they're right? I'm Lynmarie, and I'm back with more on the prophetic. I've been helping people with this for a couple of decades, and I have something to say on that verse. The verse I'm speaking of is, of course, Matthew 16:4. Here's Jesus in the New King James Version. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. Now that seems pretty clear. Or is it? I've learned through seminary training that what seems obvious in the Bible may not be. There's a lot of things to consider to correctly decipher the meaning and application of verses or passages in the Bible. First of all, it wasn't written in our language. That's huge. Then there's literary considerations, the genre, the context and account details, and the crucial cultural distinctives. Plus, who was the text written to? Why? When? By whom? And from where? Just one of those factors by itself can be pivotal. Now, I'm not talking about trying to twist a verse into what one wants it to say. Quite the opposite. I'm talking about taking the time to extract the closest thing to the true meaning. That is, what the author actually meant at the time and who it applies to. Well, enough on hermeneutics. Let's take a look at the context of the verse in question. Just 4 verses. Then the Pharisees and Sadducees came, and testing him, asked that he would show them a sign from heaven. He answered and said to them, "When it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. Hypocrites, you know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah." And he left them and departed. The question as to whether we who appreciate the voice and the miracles of God are wicked and adulterous mostly comes down to the Greek and the context and account detail. I think we get the idea of the meanings of wicked and adulterous, adulterous meaning unfaithful to God. And we better confirm that we're correct about the meaning of the word sign as well, because that's what the whole dispute I'm addressing today is over. Well, the Greek word for sign is semeion, Strong's word 4592. Official Greek definition, quote, an indication, typically miraculous, given especially to confirm, corroborate, or authenticate. It's used dozens of times in the New Testament in connection with authenticating the work of Jesus. So, just what you thought. A miraculous sign or wonder, a supernatural occurrence to confirm something. A sign in English is a sign in Greek. Okay, the key word in interpreting this verse is the word translated as generation, as in a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. Now, a lot hinges on this word. It reveals who Jesus is speaking of here, the question of the day. It's Strong's word 1074, genea. Thayer's Greek lexicon provides 4 distinct definitions for this Greek word. So all we have to do as students is to identify which one applies in this verse. Well, the first meaning is connected to begetting or birth. So that's talking about a family or a tribe. But when we use the term generation, we think of it as either the 3rd or 4th meaning of this Greek word. The third meaning is simply the whole multitude of people living at the same time. Maybe you think of the word generation that way. The fourth meaning is similar, but more specific. This definition goes like this: an age, that is, the time ordinarily occupied by each successive generation. In other words, a span of years. Different than a lifespan, a generation in this fourth meaning speaks of the period of time it takes for one group of people to be born, grow up, have children, and for those children to grow up. But it's the second of these four meanings that seems to apply in this verse. Let me give you the meaning, and then I'll share why I think it applies. This definition of Genea includes the phrase men of the same stock and men very much like each other in endowments, pursuits, character. In other words, a group of people having something in common. And with this definition comes several New Testament verses that use that definition of Genea. Let's visit just two of them briefly. The parable of the unjust steward in Luke 16:8 uses the same Greek word. Quote, "So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their Genea, generation, than the sons of light." What is this parable about? Well, basically, Jesus commended unbelievers in this parable for their negotiating skills, their shrewdness. Notice the way Jesus used the word generation here, though. The sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. We can see he's clearly contrasting two groups of people: sons of this world and sons of light. He was talking about the second definition of Genea, a group of people having something in common. One group consisted of pagans, the other of believers. So this is a clear example of the word generation in the Greek, meaning a group with something in common. Now, another example given in this reference book, where the word translated as generation carries the fourth meaning, is Mark 9:19. I'm sorry, it's the second meaning. Jesus rebukes a group of people discussing exorcism. He says, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him," the demonized boy, "to me." Now, the listeners consisted of the disciples, some scribes, the father of the demonized boy, the boy himself, and possibly some onlookers. Together, they made up a group. What did this group have in common? They were all listening or involved in the dispute about the casting out of demons. Or you could look at it another way. You could look at it as just the scribes and, Sadducees that were there. They form a group. And I'm sure he was really directing this at them specifically. But either way, it still works. It's a group of people that have something in common. So let's take what we learned about the second meaning of Genea back to the verse in question today. Remember, our quest is to understand what Jesus meant by generation when he said a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. Here's the full verse, Matthew 16:4. "A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah." Focus on that last statement. No sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. No sign shall be given to who? Who's the it? It's just a pronoun for generation. Genea, right? So What generation is Jesus speaking of when he says a wicked and adulterous generation seeks a sign? A family or tribe? Is he speaking of that generation? No. Those living during the period of time it takes for one group of people to be born, grow up, and have children. I don't know how that applies. What about a whole multitude of people living at the same time? Not necessarily. More likely, it's the second meaning, because Jesus was clearly speaking to a group that had something in common. Those who would witness Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection directly or by word of mouth. Now, if you're wondering if he could have been referring to those in the end times, possibly us, I don't think so, because we're supposed to look for signs. We're supposed to watch. And there'll be plenty of signs in the end times, according to Revelation and the apocalyptic scriptures. No, I believe he was talking about the people right there in the vicinity at the time. When Jesus said a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, he wasn't talking about you, us, those living today. He was specifically targeting the group who would be there to witness his resurrection, the sign of Jonah, and possibly the religious leaders specifically. There it is. No more confusion. You're good. God is not unpleased with you because you love his voice and his miracles as well as his word. And now, when someone throws Matthew 16:4 at you, ask them if they have a couple of minutes to open the Bible with you. You could use the internet to view the Greek. Just go to biblehub.com/interlinear. And while you're at it, ask them if they'd like to live beyond their wildest dreams.